Welcome to Sales Training for Podcasters, the podcast designed to better your sales process. We'll be sharing tools, tips, and techniques, whether you love sales or hate sales. If you've got a product or service to sell and a podcast, you've come to the right place. Now, here's your hosts, podcast strategists, Doug Sandler and JJ Flizanes.
Welcome, everyone, to Sales Training for Podcasters. This is episode number 2. In episode number 1, we just told you a little bit about the show and what we're going to be doing. And today we're going to focus on you getting to know us a little bit more so you understand the perspective and information and history that we have with selling and with podcasting. So today's show will be focused on Mr. Doug Sandler. Well, Doug, why don't we start by telling people, and by the way, you know, I am the more straight-laced one, not that I can't be goofy, but so I will warn you that at some point we do get a little goofy and playful, which we think is fun. We hope you'll enjoy it as well. And if you don't, that's no worries. You can move on to somebody else's show. But so that we're not, I don't want to appear to be too straight for all of you. And then later
no, I'm in the podcasting for the fun of it. I want to make sure we not only we make money, but we have fun in the process. So come on, everybody, just lighten up a little bit. I promise you'll make money. Let's just get to the fun.
So let's go over your history, my love. Let's talk about where you come from, who your dad is, and how sales has literally been in your life from birth.
In 2013, I reinvented my career at the age of 40 something. I can't remember exactly where I was. In 2013, became a professional speaker. Every time I would get up on stage and talk about selling or customer service, which were two things that I am really passionate about and shared with audiences all over the country in the United States, I would walk off the stage and somebody would always say, "Hey, are you related to that Sandler guy that did the sales training?" I never really realized, I knew who my dad was. My dad was Dave Sandler, and he was, the founder of Sandler Sales. And what I never realized was quite the impact, how much of an impact my dad actually had on the rest of the world, because I spent 30 years prior to that as a guy kind of my head down. I was working hard. I was an entertainer in the social marketplace within DC, District of Columbia. And I really enjoyed it, but I never really spent a lot of time focused on the game of selling. People would come to me, they would hire me, and I always thought they would hire me just because they liked me and I was a good guy. But what I realized was I was reverting to my old tapes. That was all my dad's stuff going off in my head about, how to handle a prospect and how to build the relationship and how to, really take a common sense approach to selling. And so, the whole idea that my dad was this icon in the world of sales was really unknown to me until probably close to 10 years ago. And I had spent my entire adult life, selling and not realizing I was really using my dad's system effectively. So that's kind of my beginning and my upbringing. I can remember with my dad building all of the binders and the notebooks that was the original selling system that he would take to the couple of meetings that he would have in the course of his week, and just the evolution of that into hundreds of franchises worldwide. Just kind of fun to watch the progression of that, but never realizing the impact that had until many, many years later in my adult life.
I remember when we were in San Francisco for the C-suite event and somebody from Texas say, "Hey, how's your dad?" And you're like, "Good, he's dead." And it was the first time I had experienced,
yeah.
He's been dead for a while. This is the first time I experienced you being recognized as Dave Sandler's son. And I think another one or two podcasters that we know that live more on the East Coast, which is where you're originally from, as well as I, and we currently live in California. I remember someone else saying, "Hey, is that your dad?" I've seen it and witnessed it myself, but I want to talk a little bit about, for those of people who are listening, because I didn't know anything about your dad. I had never heard of him before. Tell people about your dad and Sandler Sales.
Well, the creation of Sandler Sales, it's just really, as I said earlier, it's the common sense approach to selling. It's creating a sales system that's completely unlike anything that has ever been used before, whether it's the Carnegie method or Xerox or IBM or any of the traditional sales methods of overcoming stalls and objections and having actual name for closes. And, you get into an environment where you start using some of those older systems, those more traditional systems like Carnegie. And, you have a specific name for a type of close, and the prospect says, "Oh, well, that was the impending event close." And you're like, when your prospect knows the same script that you're on, it's time to get a new script. or it's time to start doing something differently. Again, I'm not trying to get anybody to look into sales as any kind of, illusion. You're supposed to sell the way that you are as a person. And so many of my early mistakes in selling came because I was trying to be somebody that I wasn't. And that was a lot of the failure that I had early on in my career was just that. And so if there's anything that I can, use as advice to give to anybody that is in our listening audience today, it's, hey, even if you don't have a system that you're tapped into, first thing you got to realize is you need to be yourself. If you're not going to be yourself, it's going to feel completely false to you. And guess who else knows that? Your prospect. So, just be aware of that. So it was great just growing up in the environment, because it really was a game of understanding positivity, positive attitude, saying the right things, building relationships, developing rapport, just understanding maybe some of the psychology of selling, not just the moves of selling, but the psychology, what it was behind the scenes that was going on in your prospects' minds, the power plays that many times prospects and salespeople have in the game, the cat and mouse thing where you're chasing your prospect. If you're doing that, you're in the wrong place. I'm not saying that from a negative perspective. You're in a good place because you've learned a lesson. But now you've got to train yourself differently, whether it's using a system that we're going to share with you, or you use your own system or somebody else's system, just plugging into a system that feels comfortable for you, using a process that works for you, and that has a positive outcome. Without those things, then it really doesn't make sense to plug yourself into this illusion of who you are in trying to sell.
Let's talk about, we're going to get to that. Let's talk about just the nuts and bolts of what you have been what you've experienced and been witness to and been around for. So let's, again, just quickly go through Sandler sales training. It started when, it grew to be how much, what, I know you mentioned the impact that it makes on the world, but I just want to create a picture of the magnitude of Sandler sales training success.
Well, hundreds of thousands of people have been trained by Sandler sales. Hundreds of franchises are sold, and they have individual people that own these franchises around the world, and they teach a training system that leads people through a system so that you understand from beginning to end, the process and the methodology that you go through. It's not just hey, let's put a whole bunch of stuff up on the wall and let's see what sticks. And if it sticks, let's go ahead and call that person a customer. It's actually understanding. Yes, while there is a numbers game involved in any sales system, in Sandler specifically, there is it's a numbers game. You still have to make dials. You still have to call on prospects. You still have to, but the way that you define these things, the control is completely in your hands. Once you understand the psychology behind what brings you to the table, you're already winning. It's no longer a no. My dad always used to tell me through the process, early on in the process, is that, hey, be happy you got a no. It puts you one step closer to a yes. Now, you may have heard that many, many times before, but the reality of it is that's true. If it takes you 10 prospects or 10 calls to get a prospect on the phone, and then 10 phone calls in order for you to get somebody that goes to a personal meeting, and then 10 of those, it may take you 1,000 total, connects before you make a sale. So it's now just not a matter of man, I feel horrible because I didn't make a sale, or I couldn't get somebody on the phone, or I didn't get anybody to return my email. Now, it's going to take you 100 or 1,000 or whatever that number is to actually get somebody to say yes. And when you come at it from that perspective, you take all of sales is not an area, as my dad used to say, it's not an area where you come to get your needs met. You're not going to get your needs met in selling. Unless your need is, I need to be rejected, then you're not going to get your needs met. However, if you put yourself into a system where you understand the numbers, you understand the psychology, and you understand the process, then again, you are destined to win. And it becomes just a matter of, you don't have to be insensitive, unsympathetic, uncompassionate person, and not get in touch with your feelings. Actually, the more in touch with your feelings that you are, the better when it comes to selling, because that totally comes through to your prospective customer. So my dad created this enormous system worldwide that even, my dad passed away in 1995. So how many years later are we? We're 25 years, 26 years almost as of the recording of this later. And it's just this movement. It's incredible to watch to see the look on somebody's eye when I am speaking on stage or meeting somebody for the first time, or maybe meeting somebody for the 20th time and they not realize that my dad was Dave Sandler, and me sharing something and saying, oh yeah, my dad used to say that all the time. And then something in their brain goes off that says, wait a minute, Sandler. Oh my God, you're Dave Sandler's son. That's, to me, that is so inspirational to see that, to witness that, and to be a part of that, and to be not just a witness, but to be on the other side of it. Somebody that's like, whoa, I did not realize exactly how much impact that my dad had on this world. And he has had probably hundreds of millions of dollars of impact, meaning in sales, in franchise sales, not only for Sandler, but in sales for the customers themselves. The system that's been created has created a movement of wins for a whole bunch of people that probably never felt like they wanted to be, or knew that they were in sales all along. Like as a podcaster, some people might not feel like they're even in sales. And what I would caution people to think about is, if you want to create a business, somebody's got to sell something. You can't just arrive and have a 6-figure, 7-figure, 8-figure income. You have to do something to get the skids greased. And part of that is this word called capitalism. And that's what selling is really all about.
Two things before we go into Doug's story in terms of how he became a podcaster and his experience in podcasting, because this is a sales training for podcasters show. So I want to make sure everyone who's listening, I also wanted to address, in case any of you started to shrink and cringe at the number of phone calls. We're setting this up so that you understand Doug's relationship to sales is it's in his blood. It's been around. He doesn't have any negative opinion about selling. Many of you listening do, which is why you're listening, because you want to get over that. So I want to address that. While he was talking about phone calls and how many calls do you need to make, the reason why podcasters, I think, aren't bridging that gap is because in our business, we're going to attract those sales. We're going to attract those leads, and we're not going to have to pick up the phone and pound the pavement and search for leads. We're going to get them handed to us through your podcast it's done well.
That's the huge benefit of podcasting. So yeah, if my word of making phone calls was created this level of fear and anxiety in you, know that as a podcaster, you have the best business development tool under the sun at your fingertips, and you're going to automate many of the processes that you need that will replace that phone call, jitters. So just know that we're going to get you there just one step at a time.
And I'm going to represent those of you that are the opposite of Doug. You've had no experience. You've been taught selling is bad and it makes you cringe and you feel like a fake and you feel like you have to put on, or you're lying to somebody, or you have to try to coerce somebody into giving you money. We're going to talk about that too. So that's one of the benefits of the two of us doing the show, is that we represent both ends of the spectrum, and the blend in the middle, and the delivery that's going to be unique and different for you. We're going to represent all of that. But in order to keep going, I want to make sure now we understand Doug's relationship to podcasting so we can marry the sales training with the podcasting. So Doug, why don't you talk about your story about when you started your show?
Yeah, well, 2013, with this career reinvention from entertainer to professional speaker, it took me about 1.5 years to think about what were going to be my next steps. So early 2015, I finalized a book called Nice Guys Finish First. And as a way to promote Nice Guys Finish First, I went to a buddy of mine and said, hey, I don't really want to use a publicist or a PR company to promote my book. I want to do something that's kind of cool and like new media-ish. I said, I want to create a podcast, but I'm not really familiar. So his name is Strickland Bonner, and Strickland and I set on a path to create this podcast. He doing the technical stuff and me doing more of the personality or out front, activities. So we started the Nice Guys on Business in February or March of 2015. And we just use it as a way to promote my speaking business, to promote my book, and to promote my training company that was teaching companies how to effectively work customer service. And then that evolved into sales training as well. And as a result of that, somebody in our audience actually, after about 1 year or so and doing okay, I mean, I wasn't really setting the world on fire, but I wasn't really listening to my community either, which is something, as we talk about, JJ's rise in the podcasting space on our next episode, she'll explain how she did it. But I will tell you that I didn't really set the world on fire when it came to selling using my podcast. until about 17 or 18 months into our podcast. Somebody in our audience, his name is Lou Diamond, came to us and said, hey, you guys have kind of a cool show. I mean, he had been listening for a while, and we had met at a networking conference as well. He said, can you teach me how to make a podcast? And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I don't really know how to do that, but if you're willing to talk to me about what you want, and I can create a program and we can come up with a price that makes sense to the both of us. And that's really how my entire podcast production company was born, from one person in my community sharing what he wanted out of our services. And that wasn't even a service that I was offering at the time. So key is be a little bit flexible with what potentially you are offering to your community, listen to your community, and then give them what they want. So that was the first of over 200 clients that we have developed over the last probably close to 4 years, maybe a little bit more than 4 years within the podcasting space. And that by far did so much better than my speaking business and my training business. So I just followed the money trail, and I followed the passion trail. Then, as you know, JJ, we started to evolve from a full service company to a company that was doing a lot in the online space as well, doing podcast production. And that DIY, that do-it-yourself podcast launch service that I offer through our company called Turnkey Podcast Productions, that really became a huge passion of mine. While we weren't making the same per person that was going through the DIY that we were full service, I was getting a lot of my feel goods. I was getting my feels on, because I was now doing a lot of group coaching, a lot of training, a lot of people that were brand new in podcasting, wanting to know things like, hey, how do you build your podcast, and how do you get your podcast out to the world, and how do you establish the hosting source, all of the templated things that you need for every podcast to be launched. And then we started to see, as you have witnessed also, all of these things, these problems that get created as a result of launching a podcast. Well, now I need a way to market a product or service, or now I need to create a product or service. Now I need to know how to sell, which is the result, is this show. And there's so many things that happened as a result of me getting into podcasting that are unrelated completely to the reason why I got into podcasting to begin with. So it has been a really interesting journey, and by no means has it been a straight line. It's kind of been a mess all over the place, but a beautiful mess, because I've created the mess and I've enjoyed it. And it's been great from an income creation perspective as well throughout the entire process. So that's, in a nutshell, that's kind of like where I came from within podcasting.
Why don't you go over all of the shows that you have, and then just mention, so, be honest about like when they started to make money or when you figured that out.
Yeah. So each show that I've created actually has its own specific purpose. So if I start with our anchor show, the Nice Guys on Business podcast, 1,100 episodes ago, I think it was March of 2015 was the first episode, or somewhere around there that came out. And that show really has been the way for us to determine what any community wants. I mean, we have a large community that listens to the show. We have about 4 million downloads of the show. And while that is a great show to be able to say, hey, this is where we plant our stake in the ground, that is an unrelatable number, or an unrelatable number of audience members, downloads, or episodes for anybody to relate to. So as a result of that, we said we can do this all over again. And we've proven it many times, but we created a second show called the BizWiz podcast, which has a specific sales and monetization strategy that we were able to monetize to the tune of around $35,000 to $40,000 before we had even launched the show. So talk about being able to disprove a theory of you need a large audience and a lot of downloads in order to actually make money from a show. So we'll talk about that as we get into the episodes here. But those were two. Another show that came as a result of that, we wanted to monetize through another source. We actually have third parties that refer guests to us. So we created this show called SEDx. And SEDx is kind of like a TEDx conversation that has a host, me, and has a guest. And the guest does all of the talking. I just introduced the guest, kind of like a SEDx speech. So between SEDx and BizWiz and the Nice Guys on Business, those are kind of our in-house shows. And then I started to do some branching out to some other outside companies that wanted to host and to create some community. So I started another show called Human with Resources, and that was a fun run. That was just a season of episodes that we did for them. I created another show called the Mustang Podcast, Ford Mustang, the Early Years, and that's just a passion project. I have a 65 Mustang. I had no really plans, kind of think about the ideas of how to monetize, and I've worked on it, but I'm not really 100% sure where the monetization comes from, which is another tool to understand, or maybe that's another aspect of the show to understand, is you can't force the monetization. You kind of have to wait to see, and you have to angle, and you have to come up with different strategies. So in my case, that show, which is about 58, 54, 55 episodes in, loving the show. It's all about Ford Mustangs. Did I cover them all? I co-host a show with you called Women, Men, and Relationships every once in a while.
Podcast.
Oh, that's right. And I have my other show called the Turnkey Podcast, which is the show that we created for our company, where we teach other podcasters all of the strategies that are involved in podcasting, not just the selling side like this show. So that is a show that I bring on other podcasters, and we really do take a deeper dive into understanding what strategies work for not only for making money, but for guest management, for building community, for growing influence, and for making money podcasting. So that's the Turnkey Podcast. So all of those combined, what is that, 6 shows or something like that? It's just my business, So for me, it's like, I love it. Every one of them, I have a whole different flair, a whole different idea, and a different strategy with each one of the shows, which is, again, part of your story too. And I can't wait to share your story on the next episode as well.
So for those of you that may feel slightly overwhelmed right now in terms of how many shows Doug has, you'll be even more overwhelmed with me. And the goal here is not to make you think you need multiple shows.
No.
Get one show successful, or learn how to repurpose or rebrand and figure it out before adding other shows. Because we definitely don't want you to feel like you need to have multiple shows to be successful. You don't. You just have to find whatever your niche is, whatever your groove is, whatever your goals are, and strategize personally around those instead of thinking you have to model somebody else's success. And so this is a little bit about Doug, and the next episode we'll talk a little bit about me. So you understand how long we've been podcasting, the fact that we have multiple shows, the fact that we make money from multiple shows, gives us a little bit of credibility to let you know that we know what we're talking about. Are we experts in selling? To our own right, we are, but no, it doesn't discount anyone else who's an expert in whatever they're selling. We've just been in the podcast space long enough to see so many people not making money that are very talented. And sometimes it's literally because they're lacking strategy, or they're lacking the emotional relationship with what they're offering. And they're finding they're getting hung up on the idea of selling. And again, like Doug said at the beginning of the show, have a business means you're in sales, period. But what that means to you in terms of your energy, your delivery, your point of view, your intention, it doesn't have to mean anything specific. And we bring a lot of baggage to the table when it comes to sales. Even the most seasoned business people don't necessarily like the word sales. So we would like to reprogram your mind, your bodies, your souls, your emotions, and the way that you respond to that word. Because if you have a mission and a product that you love, then you are doing the world and the person you're speaking to a service by engaging them in what it is you do. So we'll get more into the sales training later, but Doug has a vast background, and I wanted to make sure that you understood a little bit more about him. And if you really are attracted to him, as I am, in terms of his, but no, not like I am, ladies, I'm kidding. There's tons of other shows, Nice Guys on Business, Turnkey Podcast, Mustangs on a Mission. He's got many other shows if you want to check them out and find out a little bit more about Doug.
Hey, just one thing I just want to mention before we wrap here. I just want everybody, as you're listening to this, and especially those that are seasoned podcasters that have, and when I say seasoned, I would say if you have more than 25 or 30 episodes under your belt, which is kind of someone that's almost, you're getting there to be seasoned, a year plus of experience. And I would definitely consider you seasoned, and welcome to the crew. But as you start to understand this, for those of you at any part of your journey here, selling on your podcast is not necessarily related to the size of your audience. So if you come to this with the fear of, wow, when is it time to start selling? I don't have enough people in my community to start selling, or I don't really know how to sell. Just know that it is completely unrelated, potentially, to the size of your community. So many people hang let's say, experience and expertness, that's a word, on the amount of downloads that you have. And it has nothing to do with your downloads. So if you come to this episode and this show and you have 20 downloads an episode or 10 downloads an episode, awesome. that's cool. We're going to teach you how to grow that a little bit. If you have 1,000 downloads per episode, great. And congratulations, because you're better than, from a download perspective, than, probably 90+% of the podcasters that are out there. But just know that whether you have 10 or 1,000 or thousands of downloads per episode, it does not matter. We're going to get within the mindset piece. We're going to go into the various ways that you have to make money from your show when it comes to selling. So just know that you're in a good place, and there is no judgment here. This is totally a judgment-free zone. We're excited to hear from you, to find out what we have done to help you when it comes to understanding some of these strategies. But know that if you come to us, my question's never going to be to you, well, how many downloads do you have? And we need to get you more, because that's just not, you can't, the joke is I can't go to Wells Fargo and cash a download. Well, and they're not going to take that as a mortgage payment. So why don't we maximize what you have, whether you have 10 or 1,000? I just wanted to say that because I think that so many people have this level of either shame or feel like there's some judgment attached to low numbers, especially if you have a highly niched audience. You're not ever going to have large numbers, and that's totally cool. Let's maximize what you have in place.
It's not about the numbers of downloads. It's about your conversion. So that's where the money is. It's in the conversion of those people into sales or into action. So for any of you that want to check us out a little bit more, you can go to salestrainingforpodcasters.com. Again, we're going to have some free tools and resources to offer you here, probably on the next episode or beyond. But in case you want to check us out now, salestrainingforpodcasters.com. There'll also be links to all the shows that we talked about that we have different than this one. If you want to check us out, and stay tuned for the next episode, you're going to learn a little bit more about me.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Sales Training for Podcasters. To get additional information and to access more amazing content that will boost your sales game, visit salestrainingforpodcasters.com. Hey, do us a favor. Rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Again, thanks for listening.